Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today I've got a special guest, and that is Paul from Understanding Conspiracy. His content's fire. If you haven't checked out his YouTube channel or podcast, we'll post that down below. But we're going to be diving into DMT, Nephilim, fallen angels, this spiritual battle that we seem to find ourselves in against these occult secret societies and those people that seem determined to take over the world. But welcome to the show, mate.
No, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
And for those that haven't followed your work, what started you down this path and all these rabbit holes? And yeah, what's your backstory?
Well, I certainly didn't plan to end up where I am, which I don't think anyone really does when you get into this kind of game, the game of conspiracy. But I was, when I first woke up is a good word for it. That's the word we'll use. Came out of the matrix, shall we say, something like whatever term you want to use for it.
Yeah.
I was at university. I was doing a fine art degree at Lincoln University in the UK, and I was very much of the new age type, shall we say, very much into sacred geometry as like a case study for my artwork and understanding quantum physics and the electromagnetic universe and frequency and sound, all that kind of thing. And when you're kind of delving in that kind of world online, which was a bit crazy back then, to be honest, it was a wild west of conspiracy, I like to call the internet back in that time, like 2011 period, something like this.
Yeah.
The end of the world was about to happen in 2012. The Mayan calendar was going to come to an end,
Yeah.
and that it just captured my imagination. I was like, "What the hell are these people looking at? That's making them think the world's going to end. Like, what have they seen? You have to know what they have seen." And you do kind of end up, like I said, discovering like this overarching conspiracy that seems to control every facet of our life. That was just my nexus point in the Mayan calendar stuff. That turned out to be much about nothing in the end, or did it? We don't really know what happened in 2012, but the world doesn't feel like it's been the same ever since, at least not for me.
Yeah.
Something definitely changed. But that's what led me into one thing to another. And I kind of just dived into the Warren hole and discovered that, well, yeah, everything isn't what it seems. And from 2012 to 2014, I kind of went through a huge learning period, and diving into the occult, and trying to understand the world through the psychedelic perspective. I was very much into a psychedelic explorer, and trying to get in touch with some form of spiritualism or spiritual understanding through psychedelics. It wasn't a trivial thing for me. It wasn't just a fun for a Saturday night type of stuff. It was a lifestyle, and exploring Taoist philosophy and listening to like Alan Watts and Terence McKenna as well on a regular basis, trying to absorb all of their lectures, and get to
Yeah.
grips with like the Tao and the way. And at the same time, I was always bumping into like the Christian perspective in the conspiracy world. And I left that there for a while because I thought I could find all the answers through kind of like the more psychedelic exploration perspective. And I kept hearing sermons from preachers as well, and this explanation that basically Satan rules the world and his agents on the earth worship him and venerate him. They worship Lucifer, and it's kind of like it can't be that simple, is what I kept thinking. Oh, there must be some complex nuance to it in some way. And you get
Yeah.
into like the Gnostic stuff, and the demiurge, and you start believing that kind of angle. And if there is a god of this world, then he is the devil, and he is like basically a cruel, stupid god, and there's a god above him that we really need to get in touch with, and all this type of stuff. And I dabbled with that for a bit, but I eventually came to the Christian perspective as the truth, and I was born again in 2014 in March, and that's my channel is now a Christian contrarian truther channel first and foremost, and that led me to starting it in 2014, kind of coming out of that world, that life. I basically just asked God to show me if he was real, and he did, and nothing's been the same ever since. And here I am now, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years later. Time's getting away from me. We're almost at 12 years now. And I have this YouTube channel called Understanding Conspiracy. We just hit 115,000 subscribers yesterday. So that's something. And I have started a series on the channel called The Nephilim Looked Like Clowns, which gets into biblical history and the
Yeah.
giants of the antediluvian age and the post-diluvian age as well, and where we get the clown from, how it is a literal representation of demons through and through, historically speaking. And I bring all the receipts for that, the historical records, and we get into spiritual warfare stuff and explain what costumes are actually used for by ancestor spirit worship cultures to channel the entities of giants, the spirits of giants, shall we say, which we call demons today. And it really gets into some crazy stuff on there. But that's what I'm primarily known for. So that's the book here. And I'm writing the second volume right now. But there is an entire YouTube series started in 2016 on my channel with about 50 episodes, just fleshing the idea out. And the first episode from 2016 is just the ramblings of the insane. It's me just trying to figure out what the hell I've come upon, and just splurting stuff out here and there. And it is not the highest quality, I'm not going to lie, but the later episodes are much more documentary style, much more put together, a lot more refined. So if you're going to check it out, I'd recommend working backwards, to be honest, just to get a good grip of the idea. But I also am quite well known for talking about a very contentious subject in the Christian world, which is about the return of Jesus, and that he actually already came back and has established 1,000-year reign on earth at some point. And we are now living in a very short time after that, called the little season of Satan, where the devil's let loose and he gets to basically call the shots for a very short time, a season, maybe 250 years, maybe 500 years. We don't really know. And that goes against all convention of the modern church, which believe Jesus is still yet to return and establish his millennial reign. But I've kind of popularized that idea quite a lot in the past year or two. So I'm kind of known for a lot of things, but other than that as well, I have my own podcast, the Truth of Therapy Sessions. This is what it looks like, where we talk about the truth of journey, telling loved ones, friends and family, the pitfalls. I have a Tips for Truther series on that on my channel as well, to try and help people navigate that world of waking up and what it means to wake up. When I started the channel, it really was about the psychology of being a conspiracy theorist, understanding conspiracy. And that ethos has never really left. So you get a lot of meta commentary on my channel about truther topics. So, like, what are the factions all saying about this particular event? What do the New Agers say? What do the Christians say? Where's the difference here? Where's there some middle ground? What perspective should we take? What do we know? What are the known knowns? And we get quite abstract sometimes talking about things on there, but we have fun. I get podcast guests from other channels, other podcasters in the conspiracy world. We're quite well networked now, and kind of regular guests on as well, just to kind of share their journeys and perspectives on things. So it's quite a scattershot channel. It's kind of a be-all capture for all things conspiracy, but those are the things I'm known for primarily. Those are my babies of research, the clown stuff and some of the kingdom stuff. So that's kind of it, really. But you'll find a lot of things on my channel.
Awesome.
And that's how I got there.
Yeah, and I've checked a lot of them out, and some great stuff there, guys. But as you say, it's hard once you go down these rabbit holes and you learn about these occult secret societies that all seem to be, Satanism, Luciferian, Morlock, Baal, all these old gods or whatever you want to call it, that it becomes very clear in a battle of good versus evil, and that turns people towards the light. Now, some people take that path of, the more meditation or looking within, and other people we've seen a rise in Christianity, I think, for sure. And then we get into the discussion around, well, what aspects of different religions have been hijacked? The church has got a bad name versus the true teachings of some of these older books. So how do you think about all that when people say, look at the Pope and the Catholic Church versus Christianity and the old teachings of the Bible? What's been corrupted in your mind, and how does that all kind of fit together? What's the truest version of it? Yeah.
Well, I think it's quite popular in the modern day to have a caricature in your mind of what it is to be a Christian, and I don't think that's through anyone's particular fault. I think it's gamed that way. I think the system is gamed to make you believe being a Christian is Ned Flanders, for example, or being a Catholic, and having a man intercede on your behalf through the confessional booth and flagellating yourself, and making sure you do the correct blood drinking ritual, you know what I mean, and eating the flesh type stuff. And it's kind of, I don't personally believe you need any of that type of relationship with Jesus Christ. I think that's man-made institutional religion. I don't think that has anything to do with true fellowship or ecclesia with fellow believers or followers of the way of Jesus. So I think there's been a lot of corruption to tarnish Jesus' name, to guilt by association with him with the child raping priests of Catholicism, let's say, and I think a lot of that is done by design. I don't think any of these churches really have anything to do with Jesus, really. And I think there's a strong case to say many of those people who lead those institutions or even follow it are the ones Christ will say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." When they say, "Lord, I'm here. Didn't I do so many great things in your name?" He's like, "I don't even know who you are." Because I think a lot of people have been deceived, and I think there's lots of good people in these institutions too who really do believe it was necessary to have a relationship with God, that you must have these men there as like an intermediary, representing God on earth, which is literally what the Pope is supposed to be.
Yeah.
You don't call any of the man father. That's not what you're supposed to do as a Christian. That's what people do in that institution. But there are plenty of institutions which have a Christian veneer. There's lots of Protestant institutions that from the Reformation that have been created that are equally as foul and reprehensible in my eyes, like the prosperity gospel types out there preaching, money and power, and you got those deliverance types out there, like slapping people and making them shake on the floor, speaking in tongues types. You get the mega churches, which is just gross amounts of money flying around in jets, and you get these just singing praise worship and singing all about blessings and joy, but really being a Christian is darker and harder than that. It's trials and tribulations and judgment, unfortunately, and it's realizing that we are sinners and we make mistakes and we need a savior, and that requires self-sacrifice every day to help others over ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of churches out there that don't want to teach that message. And I think if we were living in a little season of Satan, that's exactly how we would want it, So yeah. My own view is quite contrarian to most Christians. I am a Christian contrarian by that standard. That's what you could call me. But I'm a non-denominational as well for that reason.
Yeah.
And I try to distance myself from the church as it's understood.
Yes.
But I'm not against fellowship with believers, which I think is what the true church was supposed to be, not a building necessarily.
Yeah.
Where one or two are gathered in my name, I'm there, is what Jesus said, So I think we can hopefully get people to understand that that's what it truly is. And what I'm looking for is I don't want people to join a religion. I want you to have a personal relationship with God. And that starts by asking, and it doesn't start by walking through some doors in an old building and becoming a member of some system.
Yeah.
So that's my take. And I think there has definitely been corruptions when it comes to institutions.
Yeah.
But I don't think that should take away from what a real relationship with God actually is.
Yeah. And the flip side of that is obviously these evil secret societies, many of which want to invert the teachings of Christianity or these rituals they do and that type of thing. So how's that journey for you been discovering? Because one thing that I've learned recently is that whether it's Freemasonry or, Mormonism or even the institutions you just named, they've all been kind of infiltrated, corrupted. A lot of this seems to be on worshipping the old pagan gods or Kabbalah influences or just these kind of dark. Yeah, so how do you think about all those secret societies that have kind of infiltrated everywhere and gained control over so much now?
Yeah, well, I think we talk in conspiracy terms about, well, they control the educational institutions, they control the schools and the flow of information, they dictate what our history actually is, it's written by the winners, and we have no problem as conspiracy theorists kind of like believing and understanding that, well, they probably lied to us about history, but sadly even a lot of Christians never apply that same logic to, well, they probably lied to you in the seminaries as well about what truly happened and where we are on the timeline and what's going on with Christian history too. That's probably also orchestrated, controlled and dictated to by these people behind the scenes who have a vested interest in an agenda to corral and lead even Christians down the wrong path. And I think I've kind of figured out that I think that the lie a lot of Christians are being taught by Freemasons who have hijacked these institutions and churches is that, well, Jesus is yet to return and you're going to get raptured. I think we're past all of that. And again, this is a massive contentious subject. I have hours of content on this, and so do many other channels who are part of this community, explaining how this is so. It's not simple. I can't just give you a one-line answer to explain it all away, but there's precedence to say that this is probably what's really going on. And the reason why there's so much Freemasonic influence in the church is seemingly spreading the gospel. You can't really fault them on what they're saying, but that one little bit of lie is where you are on the timeline. And their job is to make sure you're still waiting for Christ to return, not that he already did. And that we're in the final season before the judgment, the great white throne judgment, not tribulation. So that seems to be what the point was of why there is so much Freemasonry in churches. And even like Mormonism itself is Freemasonic through and through. I had a guest called Heidi Love on my channel.
We've had Heidi on too. Yeah.
Yeah, she's an ex-Mormon, and you know her story. Like it's just basically Freemason light. Is the only way to describe it. You know, they have the aprons and the bibs and the same rituals with the hands up and all this type of thing, and walking through the veil, and they've got all the same Freemasonic ritual, just in this brand new crystalline church setting. You know, and it really is a cult through and through. And I think they still believe Jesus is going to return. Do you know what I mean? It's all the same. It doesn't matter which angle it comes from. And I think the role of secret societies, my final ultimate conclusion seems to be, at the moment, their job was to hide the millennial reign of Christ. So they founded a lot of the buildings that were everywhere and claimed ownership of them. But these are actually leftovers from a millennial reign where Christ and his saints ruled for 1,000 years. So that kind of explains why we even have secret societies. These are people who lived underground for a millennia, unable to practice openly where Christ was ruling, you know. And once Christ receded, not ended his reign, but once Satan was let loose, they were just waiting to kind of work for their father, which is the devil in a sense, and gain earthly power during his reign, which is what they've always wanted. And their job was to erase the past, control the schools, control the flow of history and information, and claim ownership of everything that was already around, and founded everything. They found it all, you know. That's basically what they did. And it explains why we even have these Freemasons everywhere, and why we have these secret societies, and why they were all seemingly just created in the 1700s. Like it wasn't even that long ago, you know. And it's fascinating when you get to this perspective. Like I call the little season theory like the end of the rabbit hole. Really, you don't dig much further than that. It's a tautology, yes, and it explains everything with like 99.9% accuracy. It really places everything into a lens that fits. Again, not a lot of people are ready to hear that yet. So that's kind of my take on Freemasonry and like secret societies. I mean, you even have like the Odd Fellows, for example, in America. And they started all the orphanages and the schools, and they're very philanthropic organization to help the widows and the sick and this type of thing. But when you actually look at the work, what they basically did was institutionalize a lot of people and take a lot of the children and put them in orphanages and re-education camps, you know. It was all under this guise of, you know, all these children without parents, left over from like civil wars and things like this. We're going to take them in and teach them and give them a setting, a head of life. And they seem to own all these vast mansions with like thousands of rooms and windows in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like, we're going to put them up in our orphanage over here. It's like, who built that? When? During a civil war in a land that was supposedly just created not even that long ago. How old's America? 250 years. You know what I mean? It's kind of...
It's the same in Australia.
Yeah. So the architecture is wild, and the architecture is a huge testimony to a civilization that was clearly here at some point. So in the conspiracy world, you know, I'm giving you the Christian perspective to explain that past. But Tartarian is another angle, which usually comes from the more Gnostic New Age types in the conspiracy world. And they would say that was Tartaria. What you're seeing there is remnants of an advanced civilization that had antiquitech, that used ether energy from the atmosphere to power all their buildings. And it was scrubbed from the history books by evil controllers, you know, because there's a reset every 250 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, well, that's one explanation, but the Bible tells you what it is. And it's the millennial reign of Christ. And it's not like there's multiple resets every 250 years. There was just a reset when Satan got released, and he went on a rampage, destroying as much as he possibly could for the past 250 years since he got released. And he's basically been starting wars and genocides galore, destroying as much of it as he possibly can, and redirecting our consciousness to believe we're in a false world with a false history and everything about it, you know. And that seems to make more sense to me than there was just this nebulous ancient civilization in the past we can't find anything really about, you know. But the Bible does tell you in Revelation 20 verse 7 exactly what happened and where we are and why those buildings exist. And I think as Christians we need those answers. We need to be able to explain where these buildings came from. And I think most of the churches don't have an answer, or don't even humor it or think about it. They believe the narrative of the history they were told. But I'm not we're conspiracy theorists here on Understanding Conspiracy. So we have a different angle, you know.
What's the rough timeline then with the because a lot of the people say that reset was 1700s, 1800s when they talk about Tartaria or that type of thing. So what rough timeline is it if it's 250 years? Where do you think that kind of happened?
Yeah, so the general consensus we've come to in the conspiracy Christian angle is Christ came back roughly around 70 AD ish, give or take. We don't really know. The history, the records aren't that clear, but it seems like he at least came just after the Book of Revelation was written by John and Patmos. And people say that was written in like 98 AD. I don't think it was. I think it was written more likely in about 60 AD. And as a result, he was about 33 AD when he went up for Pentecost and ascended into heaven. That's the story, and he sent his disciples out to spread the gospel. He said, I'll be back very soon, not 2,000 years from now. So I think he came back soon, give it one generation. So roughly about 30 years, maybe 45 years, 40 years, give or take. So about 70 AD-ish is when he probably did come back. And there's documented evidence to say there was utter destruction during that time. There was the Roman-Jewish War, where Rome, the beast, destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the Jews who were the harlot that rode the beast and used the power of Rome to subjugate people and even kill Jesus Christ himself, So I think that's where it all came crashing down. Then judgment came upon them and they had the temple destroyed and there was the abomination of desolation. Then I think the Antichrist was likely Nero. That's my guess, but there's lots of guesses about who the Antichrist was, and it seems like in terms of mark of the beast, there was something called the libellus at the time where you had to have a piece of paper which gave you permission to buy or sell in Rome. And the only way to get the paper was to sacrifice in the temple to Jupiter with being witnessed by a Roman centurion or official who would sign the document for you. So there was actually a mark of the beast going around at the same time as well that you needed to buy. And so there's plenty of like contenders for that early period. That all did kind of happen in the first century. And then historically speaking, nothing happened after that, as far as we're aware. And it was all nothing, and we're still waiting for Christ to come back. But if you fast forward to 536 AD, it's documented as the worst year on record, so 500 years from then. Everything went wrong that could possibly go wrong. Utter destruction. Volcanoes going off, famine, pestilence, disease, mass die-offs, genocides. People were just pushing bodies into the ocean because they couldn't bury them anymore. There's just too many people dying all at once. People having visions of demons and then a day later dying. Things like this. Grim Reapers knocking on the door comes from this the story, but it was a terrible time. Some might describe it as something like a tribulation-like event. The sun went out for months. There's a mini ice age as a result of this, which killed many people. All the crops died. Everything went terribly, awfully wrong that could possibly go wrong. And we know this happened because of the tree rings. All the trees had a terrible time in that year. It's a jagged, small ring, with no growth. So that's how they kind of know. But when you actually consider that timeline, I don't think there was a 500-year gap. I think they've made it up. And there's a guy called Gunnar Heinsohn, a German researcher, an alternative chronologist, who he thinks 700 years was added. That doesn't exist to our timeline. And he thinks there was 3 disasters in the first millennium. There was one in the first century. Sorry, there's one in the 3rd century. There was one in the 6th century, which I just mentioned to you then. And then there was one in about the 9th century as well. And they've equated some of them to like the barbarian hordes taking over or some kind of weird cataclysm in the 1st century, which doesn't really make sense. We'll call it the beginning of the collapse of Rome, But he thinks these 3 cataclysms weren't 3 cataclysms at all. It was one giant cataclysm that happened in the 1st century. All they've done is spread it out over 700 years, and they've started to repeat characters and names and events, just change the names. And you get chronologists like Anatoly Fomenko, who's a mathematician in Russia, and he has a massive new chronology series, and he thinks about 1,000 years has been made up. So he has a different timeline, So there's no consensus, but there's at least agreement between chronologists. It's kind of like, something's wrong here. Something's really, really wrong. And he figured out through generations, through population sizes. He used the math. He's a mathematician. That's what he does. It's his job, He used the equations to figure out that the by and by, taking into account wars, genocides, general age, and all these type of things of populations in Europe and other regions. The population's it's wrong. It's too small. If the timeline we have been told is correct, we should have at least like double the amount of people here that we actually supposedly have. But we don't, because that 1,000 years doesn't exist. We don't there hasn't been enough time to make that many people that we should have according to the official narrative. That's basically the by and by of his theory, you know. Yeah. So he thinks about 1,000 years is gone. I think Gunnar Heinsohn is more accurate, and he does it through strata of digging deep into the ground and finding civilizations. And it seems like this cataclysmic event buried Rome. This much is clear. And there's nothing below Rome, apparently, when people start digging. There's nothing below the Roman Empire. The strata shows there was Rome, and then there was just what came afterwards. And Rome is buried. How did Rome get buried? Well, it seems like this enormous event that blacked out the sun was basically every volcano on Earth going off all at once. Yeah. It wiped out about 98% of the population of the Earth. And when the ash came down with the rain, it created a sediment layer that buried everything to varying degrees. Some completely under, some just by a few feet, you know, varying degrees, because rain is like that. And that's what we see. We see people digging up Rome even today. Roman ruins all over the place, everywhere. 20 feet to 3 feet to 5 feet to 15 feet under the ground. You know, it varies everywhere because Rome was a worldwide empire at this point. This is why Christ came to destroy it. It was the last empire before the tribulation. So Rome isn't around anymore. The 7 churches Paul wrote all his letter to are destroyed. They don't exist anymore. But we're supposed to apparently still be around before tribulation. So people have made it metaphorical now. Like, we're the church of Laodicea today. Symbolically speaking, America is that church or something. You know, but you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics. But if you just look at the historical record, it seems like, no, something cataclysmic happened in the 1st century. And then after that, we don't really know. We call it the Dark Ages. We don't really understand, but we do know Christianity ruled supreme for 1,000 years. Some people have said even the Byzantine Empire was said to have gone for 1,000 years, you know. But do we really know what that was? We call it the Byzantine Empire now, but I'm starting to think there's been a bit of trickery and mistakes made and lies told about what was really going on during these times, you know. And I don't think we can really trust much of the historical record because it was written by the winners.
Yes.
But what we do have are these beautiful buildings everywhere that came after Rome, which developed into a new style called Gothic architecture, as we call it, which is just beautiful, far surpasses anything. And it's kind of like these people were inspired. Where did they come up with this, you know, and where did they have the manpower or the time or the know-how to build such beautiful buildings? And not only are they just buildings, they're like sound made physical. Like, they are so geometrically perfect and functional in many ways. And they were like healing centers and resonance centers. And you know, a cathedral is, people say it's like a cathode on a circuit board. You know, like they have a function and a purpose in civilization. You have to look at what was supposedly built during the Dark Age, which was a predominant Christian-led age, and it's wonderful. Like, what they made was fantastic. The medieval period was not all that they tell it was. It wasn't terrible at all. Like, I think it was a golden age, and we've been lied to about what that time really meant. And then only when the medieval period ends do they say the Enlightenment period begins, where, you know, science and reason takes over and all this type of thing, and art flourishes, coming out of the ruins of a awful civilization run by backwards Christians who just suppressed freedom of speech and love and joy, and everything was grey and miserable, and they were all whipping themselves or something. I don't think that was the case. I think it was a flourishing time of beauty, and then the Enlightenment period was the beginning of the decay. That was the release of Satan. So you say that's roughly around the 1600s. Yeah. You know, the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, coming out of that Dark Age period. But realistically, if you take 700 years away, that's not the time at all. It wasn't the 1500s. It was the end of the millennial reign, about 900 to 800. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I get what you
and
mean, yeah.
if you go off the real timeline, we're not actually in the year 2025. Just take 700 years off that. We're probably more realistically in about 1325, about 300 and something years after the end of the millennial reign from 70 AD.
Yeah.
You know, so even then, like the timing, like 1066, the Battle of Hastings, that would have been the beginning of the Roman Jewish War. Okay, which is you know, it's just 1,000 years after that. You know what I mean? Like, like if it's 66 AD to like 70 AD was roughly when the Roman Jewish War happened. They add 1,000-year reign on top of that. Suddenly in 1066 is this rebellious war going on. Like, you have to wonder, like, were these events they've dated for us really what they tell us they were, or was there something else going on? And that's really what we're doing. That's what the work that many channels, like not just mine, have done and are still doing today. It's a whole lot to unpack, but there's so much there to sink your teeth into, and it's
one of the
it's good to have a Christian answer finally, you know, and that's what it is.
one of the best rabbit holes, Tartaria in the old world, and everything you mentioned as well, the cymatics and the beauty of it all, but the waterways and some of the fountains and how they knew
The
about
canals,
water and all that type of energy stuff as well is we've had Guy Anderson on the channel, and we're about to start a bit of a Tartaria Australia series because all that stuff is here as well. But what are your thoughts if we go back further in history about the timeline and how it ties into Nephilim or Anunnaki, fallen angels? How do you think about that timeline when this all started?
Yeah, so that's by the by, that's actually not really necessary to link into the Tartarian stuff because we're talking about a really ancient time here that kind of surpasses all of this.
Yeah.
You're talking about a time here like a pre-flood type era.
Yeah.
And I talk in the book, The Nephilim Like Clowns, I have a whole chapter on the flood because I believe it really did happen. It's not just fantasy. And I think every single culture on Earth actually has a story about it. And they have different names and different stylized ways of discussing the Great Deluge. But there was a Great Deluge, absolutely. But what was the world like before this flood? And what does the Bible tell us the reasonings behind all of this? And if you break it down, it gets really, really, really weird. Like very trippy and psychedelic and strange fundamentally. And if I could summarize it, much of this is from the Book of Enoch, which again is highly contentious in Christianity, but I think it's legit. I think it's real. I think First Enoch is a real book of the Bible that's been removed. Talk about editing, you know, and changes have been made. I think it's a part of the Ethiopian book, canonized system of books, and the Ethiopian churches were the oldest churches, you know, in Christianity. So I see no reason to doubt it at all. But the story basically goes that there was a time where angels watched over humanity as protectors, gods with a small g in a sense, and some of them one day took it upon themselves to have sex with human women. That's basically the Bible, and they created giants, which were what we call the Nephilim. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that story. That's a very generalized story. So how I've understood it, and this is how I explain it in the book, and this seems to be what all the narrative combined together is explaining, is that when God first was creating the earth, in that process on day 5 and day 6, he created man and woman. And he said to man and woman, plural, not singular, go forth and multiply and take dominion over the whole earth, including the fowl of the air and the sea of the fish. It's yours. Go. Take care of it. Have dominion. Ownership. Caretaker. You are. It's yours. Anything you can desire on the earth is in abundance for you. Control it, basically. And I think man and woman did go forth and take dominion over the whole earth and spread and take control. And I think there was angels watching over those initial humans. Many humans, not just one man, not Adam. Because the next chapter, it says God created Adam, breathed the breath of life into him after making him from the clay of the earth, and then put him in the garden. Those are two completely different stories. Because Eve wasn't even created till much later after Adam named all the animals. So it's not like the first story where God says he created man and woman, go forth and multiply. Then he created Adam and put him in the Garden of Eden. Different story. Okay, two different narratives. And that's, again, contentious. A lot of people don't like to hear that in Christianity, you know, but it seems like these first peoples were watched over by the watchers, the angels that God had trusted. And they even asked to do it, if you read the book. Let us go down there and make sure man does well on your behalf, you know. And he trusted them. He said, okay, go, do what you need to do. I trust you to look after my creation for me, you know, my people. Anyway, as soon as God created Adam and showed favor to these men and women, humans, and started teaching him things in the Garden of Eden, this is where the rebellion of the angels began. I think angels watched this happen and didn't like it. Why has God chosen one of these lesser creatures than us, which we are gods over, to rule the earth? Why has he chosen one to be a king even over us, which is what Adam was being groomed to be, a king? And he was naming all the animals. Even the angels didn't get to name the animals, and I think jealousy was seeping in, pride, and this is where the rebellion was fermented. Okay, I think this is where the issues began with the rebellion of the angels, and this is why there was a war in heaven, and a third of the angels were cast down. And, this is where it comes from. This is biblical. This is understood. There was a war in heaven. We have the commander-in-chief, Satan, Lucifer at the top, of that rebellion. But the Watchers, they did something very specific. They took it upon themselves to try and corrupt God's creation, which they saw themselves as better than, by mixing themselves genetically with them to create a hybrid offspring, which would corrupt the whole thing. And that's why the Nephilim were created. It was a strategic move on behalf of this war that was going on from specific members in that war, generals and soldiers in that war. Anyway, the earth was corrupted and destroyed, but it didn't happen straight away. The Nephilim weren't just created straight away. I think they waited. They waited a long time, 6 generations from Adam up to the time of Jared. And they watched Cain basically murder his brother, Abel, and then get cast out into the wilderness. And he basically was told, the ground won't grow for you, anything for you anymore. It's cursed on your behalf. You're going to be a vagabond and a wanderer in the earth at the whim of other people to eat and this type of thing. And he says, my punishment's too great for me to bear. Like, people are going to kill me. Like, I can't go out there. I can't do this. I'm going to die. And he said, oh, no one's going to kill you. I'm going to put a mark on you that lets them know if anyone kills you, the punishment will be 70 times worse for that person who does that to you. So he goes out in the world, practically invincible now because no one can kill him, because it's going to be terrible if they do. But who did he go out into a world to where he's worried people are going to kill him if Adam and Eve were the only 2 people around? It doesn't make any sense until you include what I just mentioned. There were already buildings and civilizations built on the earth from the Dominion people who were told to go out and multiply. But now Cain's wandering around, who's basically a demigod with knowledge from Adam, who walked with God in Eden. He knows things. And to the people who were already around, who were quite ignorant and naive, he was a god. So what does he do? He goes to the land of Nod, takes a wife, and builds a city. And he names that city Enoch after his first child. So this is not the Enoch who wrote the book of Enoch. This is like an earlier Enoch, way before Enoch came in like the 8th generation, okay, from Jared, from Seth's lineage. This is of Cain's lineage. And then the whole first book of Genesis is about these 2 lineages, Cain's progeny and Seth's progeny. And it goes through all the generations of both lines. And they share some similar sounding names, but they're not the same. And it's only by the 6th generation of Jared, which is the time of just before the Mech, I think, is when the Watchers came down and started to mix with the daughters of Cain. And I think it's an enemy of my enemy is my friend situation. I think the rebellious angels saw Cain, how much he hated God. He went around building cities and basically enslaving the people that were around and making them work for him in his cities. He taught the people weights and measures, according to Josephus, which is like a Jewish historian from the 1st century. Now, to us, that's nothing. Rulers and tape measures and weights. It doesn't mean anything. Measuring stuff means nothing to us. But to them, that was a big deal, because these people who were around didn't have a sense of ownership. There was no such thing as property lines. There was no such thing as mine and yours, But that's what Cain introduced to people, a sense of ownership. And as a result, that causes pride, jealousy, corruption, covetousness, war, greed, and the rest of it. So he introduced sin to the world as much as he possibly could and was corrupting mankind as much as he possibly could. I think the angels in rebellion saw that and said, we can work with this guy. So they came down. And I think Cain offered up his daughters to the Watchers to create this abomination we call the Nephilim on Mount Hermon. And that's how we ended up with these monsters everywhere, which basically eventually took over the whole earth, corrupted all of mankind, had people worshipping them as gods, or if not worshipping the giants as gods, worshipping the many angels as gods, like pantheons, of gods. Yeah. And they were like the priest class to intercede on behalf of the heavenly gods. And God himself, the real creator, no one was worshipping him. They were either worshipping the creation, which is the sun, the literal sun in the sky, or the moon, or worshipping these false gods, which were the Nephilim, or the pantheons of rebellious angels. And mankind was corrupt. They were killing each other, murdering each other. It was horrible. You know, there was giants walking around eating people. The book even says that once the giants got so big, humans couldn't sustain them anymore. Like grains of the field and stuff was not enough. So they started just eating people and each other. Like, they were nuts. These giants were crazy. I don't think they were very smart either. I think they were just whim to their desire and lust and flesh and gluttony and hunger. You know, they weren't like thinking like humans, but they were half angels. So they had psychedelic, trippy looks and powers to them. They were insane looking monsters. I think they were a mix between dragon and human. And when you mix those two things together, you get what looks like a clown, basically, with a big, wide, grinning, toothy grin and bulging eyes and flailing, crazy red hair and like just crazy patterned skin on a white base. And it just looked insane, like absolutely nuts. And that's what my work's about, the aesthetics of that particular thing as well. But that's the story. That's the rebellion of the angels. And by the time the flood came, they'd already been killed. So people don't realize this. They think the giants are why the flood happened. It's actually not. The giants died about 250 years just before the flood. And they were made to murder each other. So the angels went down, the archangels like Michael and Raphael, and they went down basically and made the giants murder one another in power struggles. I'm going to be the only giant king around here type stuff, you know. And all the brother against brother, basically, all the giants were slaughtering one another. And the angels, the fathers, had to watch. That was their punishment, to watch their children murder one another, you know. And then they were bound in chains after that. And then mankind was just left around with giant bodies all over the place, like rotting away, probably turning into the mountainscapes we see today on Earth. You know what I mean? Like petrifying from flesh to stone, which does happen, by the way.
Yes.
Very quickly as well. It doesn't even take much.
Yeah.
And it's kind of people like living in the rotting decays of a giant war that happened. And were pretty evil by this point and brutalized and living in a horrible world that was just disgusting. Everyone had nothing but evil in their hearts continuously. And then it talks about something else that happened after that. Man took it upon themselves to start genetically engineering animals and themselves with animals. Okay, it's called the mixing of kinds in the book of Jasher. And then so mankind became hybridized monsters, and they became like centaurs, mermen, mermaids, sirens, harpies, half man, half horse, you know, whatever you want to name a cryptid, Mothman or something, or lizard people or whatever. They all came into being here this time just before the flood. And then the only thing that was left perfect in his generations was Noah. Even his sons weren't perfect. Even the corruption had got into them somehow. You know what I mean? Even his wife, Namar, probably wasn't even perfect either. But Noah was. He was the only one left that was still human and righteous at the same time. Sinless and still perfect as a human being. So God preserved the only human left. And, sorry. Can you still hear me?
Still here.
Yeah. Sorry, Maya. I know what happened here. I know what happened. I'll fix this. But yeah, he was the only human left. So yeah, God basically brought him back after the flood and said, right, go and repopulate and sort it out. I've dealt with the corruption on the earth. The giants are gone, you know, and I've preserved what I intended mankind to actually be. But they were almost gone there for a second. You know, you almost lost them all, basically. Yeah. And that's the story of the antediluvian age and where giants come from. And so they actually had quite a short time. But it seems like if you read the early books of the Bible after that, they came back somehow. They got back after the flood. And I've had many theories and ideas on how that's happened. I wrote them in the book. There's actually lots of ideas surrounding how that happened. Some of them are wild. Some of them are plausible. But we just know they did. We can't say how necessarily, but we definitely know they did manage to come back. So that's basically it. I'll just switch here to my laptop camera just so we've got something going on. But that's the story in a nutshell of the giants and where they come from and how it all happened to begin with. And the rebellion never ended. The war's still on. So when they die, the spirits get stuck on Earth. And the Book of Enoch explains this, and they literally are just demons. That's where we get demons from, and they are horrible. And the only thing they want to do is get a body.
And you very much believe that's how these royal families, these bloodlines, lineages have kept control and power and this knowledge all the way through. And they perform these rituals to allow these Nephilim or demons, whatever we want to call them, to inhabit these bodies of the leaders at the top, or how do you think about that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of everything. It's a bit of this, a bit of that. A lot of them think they're actually descendants of the Nephilim that came after the flood. They have the blood in them. It's just like a divine right to rule situation. They have literally angel blood in them somewhere down the line, so that makes them like better than humans. But the truth is, I don't think that's really the case, to be honest. I think they're just as human as us these days. But I think there is a case for they are fully in like cahoots with the demons and let themselves be possessed a lot and used by demons. And as a result, it's like a power transaction. They get something in return. Money, fame, power, whatever they want, whatever they want, they can have, as long as they get to be used as a vessel for the agenda of the war that's still going on. So I would say the secret societies, these power bloodline families that have these influence and control on the earth and the physical realm, are like foot soldiers in the war, really. They are disposable. They're like cannon fodder, really, in the hierarchy of everything. And in the spirit realm, their equals are probably the Nephilim disembodied spirits, and they work together with the secret societies to forward the agenda of the angels above them, the generals above them, but the master in chief of the whole army is Lucifer, is Satan himself. And it's you have to think about this as war. There's the strategies at play, and there's hierarchy and rules at play, and they are quite legalistic too. Like the devil is very legalistic. Like he won't break God's law, but he'll get you to do it. That's how it works, So he can say, I never broke any of the laws. I never did anything wrong, That's how he can't pull the wool over God's eyes, though. He's not dumb, so he's I don't think he's going to fly in the end. But that's how he plays it. He plays it so he's blameless. But look what your creation did. It's like the accuser. Look at what they did, just given the means. He didn't take much, did it? It's that's how he plays the game.
Yeah.
But the demons themselves, they don't really care much for rules or laws. Again, I think they're just out for themselves now. They just anything in any way to get back into a body is all they care about.
Yeah.
Because without a body, they're pretty much in hell. They're stuck on earth, disembodied. They have no mouth, no stomach, no tongue, no eyes, no ears, no nose. They're not embodied. They have no means to feel or sense or experience anything anymore. But they're desperate too. They still hunger, they still thirst, they still have desires and wants and needs, but they can't satiate them.
Yeah.
So if they can find a body that will let them in, they'll use that body's senses, hands, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, mouth, everything, to taste and smell and see and touch things again. And that's the deal. That's why people reach out to demons. It's like, I'll let you in my body. I'll drink blood or have sex or smoke whatever or do whatever, so you can feel it, but I want something in return. That's the deal. And this is what tribes in like Africa do. This is what like Haitian Vodou tribes are doing even in modern days, which is a strange blend of Freemasonry mixed with Vodun African ancestor spirit worship. It's like, it's a well understood practice actually in most places on the earth, especially in isolated tribes. They do this all the time. It's just in the West, we don't believe demons exist, so it doesn't work like that there. But the occults, the hidden secret societies, they know it does, and that's what they're doing too. It's their way of doing it. And the costume of a clown, I've discovered, is actually the same costume worn by these ancestor spirit worship tribes when they want to mirror something in the spirit realm to beckon it into their body. It's like a key to it.
Let's get into the clowns and the Nephilims and all that. And I think Joe Rogan probably popularized this a bit, talking about jesters and DMT entities. And I think we've both done DMT several times. And I know that I've seen those type entities, whatever you want to call them. But how was your journey of doing that? And did you know this at the time when you saw these entities? And I know you've changed your opinion on what they are now and everything. So talk about all that.
It's a strange one for me because throughout all my time doing psychedelics, so like LSD, microdosing LSD daily, trying to get some psilocybin mushrooms as well, experimenting with more like man-made psychedelics like 2CI and these really weird obscure ones as well. I did quite a few salvia trips prior to starting on the regular the more tabs and acid and stuff. And eventually I got to DMT level, and I did that about 3 times. in various different settings. And all I would discover is more about the creation, the architecture of it, the designs of everything, the connectivity of all things. And I was looking for that. I was looking at the world, at nature, trying to find how it actually works, you know. And you do truly see like the geometric form in all things. And it's far more complicated than simply sacred geometry. It's like Mandelbrot sets on top of other things as well. It gets really weird, you know, way beyond even my capacity to understand. And that's just the nature of God, isn't it? That's the point. You can't understand these things. And I had a good time exploring all of that and like looking at people on DMT and seeing how all the veins connect in like this geometric triangular form. Like they're literally just a projection in front of me of mathematical code. You see it all, you know. And but the entities never came to me when I was doing that stuff. And I was smoking weed every day, 5 joints a day as well for 8 years straight. You know what I mean? I wasn't a lightweight. This was like my life, you know, and I was truly seeking spiritual answers through doing these things as well. But the entities never came to me, and I knew about them. I was on the Nexus forums. I heard Joe Rogan talking about DMT jesters, but I already knew about the clockwork machine elves and the self-dribbling basketballs of Terence McKenna, you know, and I knew there was stuff out there, the Green Lady as well. I knew there was entities to see and meet, but they just never came to me. It was odd, and I only so fast forward, you know, I'm born again, come to Christ. I quit all these things. I go cold turkey. I quit cannabis in 2016 as well, completely. And it's only when I fully let go of all my addictions and drugs did I start to see entities when I was sober. So it was an odd experience, you know, but they weren't pleasant. They weren't nice. They wanted me dead. That's as clear as day, because I think one of them did attempt to take my life at one point. So beyond like sleep paralysis, demons on my chest strangling me in the middle of the night, dreams where I'm being chased by the Hatman demon, telling me I owe him something, some kind of spiritual contract I don't really understand. I can't remember making, but I clearly made one with this thing in a dream years prior or something. But after that, I'm just in the living room and I have this moment where I pass out. I collapse onto the side of the sofa. I can still see, but I'm paralyzed, and the whole room starts to DMTify itself and swirl into that chrysanthemum mandala form of some kind. But darkness is seeping in from the corners as well. I'm dying. It feels like I'm dying, basically. It feels like something's trying to tear me out of my body and pull me into this void. And I thought logically, like, I must be having like a stroke or a brain aneurysm or something. This is it. This is my numbers up. I'm dying. It's over, you know. But then I just say, Jesus, help me, quietly as like a croak. And it does stop instantly. And I get up and I'm like sweating and panting, you know, and it's a horrible experience. But, you know, that moment was like a huge faith solidifier for me as like someone who was just discovering what it means to have a relationship with Christ. This is when I truly learned about the spiritual warfare stuff, which is why I focus on it so much now. I wouldn't be if I hadn't experienced this stuff. I know how it sounds, but I can't lie. It happened to me. Like, so this is what happened, you know. I've got to find out why. And this is how I discovered about the Nephilim afterwards in the biblical perspective. And there was another moment where I had a DMT flashback during this like period, this 2-year period from 14 to 16, when I was sober. And I went back to the DMT realm. And this is when I finally saw one of these jesters. So wasn't even smoking DMT anymore. I was probably off it for a good 1.5 years by this point, you know, and sober, which is a trip in its own right when you've been high for like 8 years. You know, being sober is wild. Like, it's hard to get used to. You know, I was having dreams for the first time in like 10 years, which I forgot what it was like to have just a dream. That's intense, you know. But I have this DMT flashback, and I know where I am, because the thing about psychedelics is you recognize it when you're there, and you feel it, and you're like, I know where I am. I'm familiar with this place. I've been here a million times in my life. I understand this place. But when you're off it, you can't describe it. You can't hold on to it. It's like sand through the fingers. It's like you forget, like a dream, you know. But when you're there, it's like, oh yeah, here I am. I know what's going on. You're very familiar. It's a familiar place. So I knew where I was, but this time I'm in front of me is like a giant jester. But it's not a jester like with silly bells on the end of the hat, you know what I mean? Wearing like a leotard or something. It's this enormous creature that's like melded into like its surroundings simultaneously while being differentiated from it, but not really. is like a part of the background while being the wall in front of it. It's really odd. But I'm looking up at it. So it's a giant. That much is clear. It's a giant, you know. And it's made up of black and white lines, like a snake, all the way up, you know. It had this massive grin, and it was looking down at me with these huge eyes, this massive purple lipped smile. And its head was like shaped like jester horns, but its skull was shaped like that. It wasn't wearing a hat. You know what I mean? Like that was its body. And I'm looking up at this thing for like 10 seconds, and then I'm back. And I didn't know what to do with that. That was like well, I can't tell anyone about this. They'll think I'm crazy type of situation. You know what I mean? I'll just keep that to myself for a while. But I drew it. I did draw this thing, and you can find it on the early videos, the drawing I did of this thing. It's the first thing you do when you have that kind of experience. You have to just get it down, you know. And that stuck with me for a long time. And I kind of put a lot of things together through these experiences in this time to understand, well, I have learned that the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim are trapped on Earth. But I also keep hearing about people seeing jesters when they do DMT. And to me, DMT seems like the closest thing you can get to visualizing the spirit realm of the Earth. Because you don't leave the Earth when you do DMT. You're on the Earth. You're just seeing more of it. More that you don't normally perceive. And I think even before the flood, we used to see like that. I think that was normal. We saw the earth as both the spirit and physical at the same time. There was no differentiation. And as someone in Australia, I think you can understand this as the dreaming. This ancient time where the people and the spirit realm was one. And it was like a wavy, odd experience for everybody involved. But it was normal, and that's just the way it was, you know. I think that's pre-flood world we're talking there. And I think after the flood, I think God limited our perception. And people would say, well, that's because he's a cruel, evil prison keeper who wants to keep us down. It's like, no, the earth is infested with parasitical demons that want to corrupt you and torment you and communicate with you and lead you astray. I think it was a mercy. I think he limited our perception to the physical only, so we can't communicate with the demons that are now here. The demon problem, you know. And the only reason that my theorize this is the case is because after the flood, God said to Noah, I'm going to put a rainbow in the sky as a sign of my covenant to you that I won't flood the earth again. The next one's by fire, you know, but never mind that. He won't flood the earth again. That's what he says, basically. And a rainbow is that sign. That implies there were not rainbows before this. It's like a new thing, like a brand new thing, a rainbow. Who's ever seen such a thing? And God's like, this is a symbol to you that I will never flood the earth again. So if rainbows just didn't exist prior to this, then that means there probably wasn't water on the earth. That's one theory. But if there was water on the earth, because people need to drink, you know, and suddenly rainbows now exist that didn't before, is that because you couldn't perceive a rainbow in the past because your perceptions were far wider and you saw more colors and more of everything? Have we just been limited to that narrow bandwidth of the color spectrum, which we call a rainbow?
Yeah.
You know, and that's why suddenly you can now see rainbows, because your perception's been limited to that one bandwidth of colors only. And that's it, you know. And I think that was what God was saying. I think it was a mercy. I think when you look back to it, it's like, actually, thank God he did that, because I don't think humanity would have made it much longer after the flood. It would have just got corrupted again very quickly, and it would have been over very quickly. And that's my working theory on that. I think it makes sense, you know.
Interesting take.
So when you take DMT, though, think about that. Now, what you're doing is you're brute forcing open your perceptions to be able to be back in a pre-flood state of seeing. But if you're naive to what's on the other side, you're just fodder for the demons to lie to you and tell you anything. And they do. They tell you anything you want to hear. I'm a Palladian from the constellations here to help Earth transcend to the fifth dimension, or I'm an ancestor spirit, or I'm a spirit guide, or I'm you from the future, or something, or we're aliens, or we're just interdimensional consciousness, and our job is to help humanity get to the fifth dimension where we are right now. Or they'll tell you they're in a better place, and you're in a lower, lesser place than we are. But the truth is, we are exactly where they want to be. We are embodied souls. They are not. They do not have a body. They are in a weaker, lesser state than you. And that's the first lie they'll tell you. that's what you always find in the New Age. We have something to learn from them. You have nothing to learn from them. They want to take everything from you, though. They want you. They're jealous of you. They hate you. Like, that's the bottom line of it all. And the psychedelic community does not like me saying this. I get a lot of backlash from them, but I don't see anybody else saying it. I think it's naive to assume benevolence just because they look psychedelic. And even Terence McKenna said, do not give in to astonishment,
Yeah.
But I think that's the game we're up against. And I think that's the issue with the psychedelic community today is its naivety,
I
unfortunately.
completely agree that you're definitely opening yourself up, and that's when they talk about set and setting, or people doing it in nature, or doing it with people that are very experienced, that can look after you. And then, but I guess the counter argument is a lot of people find some really good healing if they're ready for it from some of these plant substances, and probably particularly more mushrooms that are obviously a lot softer. And if you believe in God and creation, and eating a mushroom from the earth, like, can't be too bad for you, type of thing. So,
well, this is the thing. I don't think it's inherently evil. I think it is normal. Like I said, I think it was actually the normal state of man at one point to perceive the spirit realm and be in touch with those type of things. I don't think it is wrong inherently to go and perceive these things. I think the naivety to the current state of human history and what's actually on the other side is the problem.
Yes,
I think the assumption that it's all good, is the issue that comes here.
Yeah.
I don't think the spirit world is evil. I think it's just infested with parasites. So it's dangerous to go there now, unfortunately, because of this problem of the Nephilim, So if you do go there, you're like a baby in the middle of no man's land, in the middle of the trench warfare, wandering around looking at the flowers. You know what I mean? Like, you're in the middle of a war zone and you don't know it, like, you don't realize it, and the first thing that gets to you, your whim to it, then and if you're so ignorant of this biblical narrative and history, it's kind of like, it really puts into perspective what's actually going on and why you should be extremely careful if you're going to dabble with those things.
Yes.
Very, very careful, because we have an enemy just waiting to abuse us. Now, that isn't to say angels can't protect you, because they're in the game too. There is a good side to the war, so God is in control. It's possible he can protect you in some circumstances, but I would be very weary of anybody telling you like the setting and the mood you're in is going to change anything realistically. And this is another point I would counter to that is, look, demons would rather you didn't believe they exist. They would rather not reveal themselves to you if that keeps you trapped in your own delusions that you are a god or something like that, that goes against God itself, the creator. Yeah. They'll happily never reveal themselves to you as long as you maintain the belief that God isn't real and it's all just a consciousness, man, or something like that, But as soon as I did believe that, but as soon as I went to Christ, what happened to me? They tried to kill me. They were very real then, and they had no issues with trying to get rid of me and revealing themselves to me then, because it's by the Bible. He already knows we're here. There's nothing we can do now. But I'd rather, and I think it was more of a, if we can't have him, nobody can. Because up until that point, I was a hedonistic psychopath, like narcissist who was out for myself. I was probably the perfect vessel for them to be using and looshing energy off for so many years. Yeah. But as soon as I cut them off and fasted and stopped taking the drugs and gave myself over to Christ, I think they were angry. They were like, we just lost a source here of sustenance, of pleasure. Like, we've just lost it. So let's kill him before he really understands what's going on, and gets fully saved by Christ, and filled with the Holy Spirit type of stuff. They lost. I think they lost. And it's only in hindsight do I now know why I never saw any entities when I was in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And that's just for me personally. Some people are in the thick of it. They know what they want, and they need the entities to maintain the lie and the illusions that they're under. So they'll reveal themselves to some, not to others. And I think it's a game. I think they've been there for thousands of years. I think they're smarter than us now. I think they know what they're doing. And like any addict, to do anything they can to maintain their supply. And they'll do what it takes,
I want to get into what you touched on before with dream time, and how that maybe our senses have been narrowed. And you brought up, interestingly, maybe that was tweaked by God. I kind of wonder, with the war on perception now, is that just the same game though by the bad guys in control with fluoride and poisoning our air, water, food, minds to dumb us down and reduce our perception. And then the next phase is what we're going into is merging with technology and AI, where at that point, God knows what they can make our perceptions and thoughts. And how do you think it all ties together, and where do you think we're going with AI?
Well, AI is interesting, but it's actually pretty rudimentary and dumb when you actually put it into practical use. I've theorized along with transhumanism. I've listened to the Ray Kurzweil for years. I understand what they're after. They want to live forever, basically, and they want to be able to transfer consciousness into a machine to do that. Okay, so I think all these technologies work in tandem. I think the transhumanists have the ideology. Okay, live forever through a machine, and how we're going to navigate a new world where we live for eternity as immortals. It would merge with technology, the singularity they call that. Okay, but then at the same time, you need bodies. Right, so you need a robot, you need a vessel that doesn't decay. So I think robotics are advancing rapidly in the humanoid category because they need a vessel for sensory experience. So how are you going to touch, feel, and experience the world around you as if you're just consciousness now that's been transferred into a chip or something? So you need a body. You need to embody that consciousness. So you've got many tech companies building many. There's like a race to who can do it first, but it's getting better and better with each iteration, and getting more versatile, more tactile, and who's to say a lot of the videos they show us aren't even AI themselves. We don't really know how far they actually are along with that kind of technology. But they're working on it, And then I think AI is the brain that they're working on to put into that vessel, the robot, that can house consciousness. So what's going to house the consciousness? How are you going to transfer something as complex as all the neurons of a human brain and the personality it holds, the soul it holds, the spirit? How are you going to move that from one vessel into another? The vessel you're moving it into has to be equally, if not more so complex as the brain itself, the human biological vessel that we live in. That's no easy task. Now, synthetic biology you could probably create. And I think they're working on that, developing synthetic biomass in some way, and they might be able to recreate a human brain quite well, very perfectly, but how do you get it to think or have the ability to house consciousness? Well, probably some kind of processing power through artificial intelligence, which are neural networks. It's kind of machine learning, machine thinking. It's a thinking version or a mechanical version of the mechanisms of thought. That's what AI actually is practicing and trying to master. You merge all those things together, biotech with robotics, with AI, you might be able to create a vessel that is basically a blank slate with a brain that has the capacity to house consciousness. That's what they're all trying to build. That's the agenda fueled by the billionaire tech companies who really want to live forever, Ray Kurzweil is doing everything he can to live long enough to see this moment happen, and he thinks it's going to happen like 2030 or something, or very soon. He's very optimistic. They're going to get there. So I think that's all it is. I think what we're seeing with AI is where we ourselves are contributing towards training a brain, a virtual brain, in some way, something that can house the complexities of a human being and its consciousness. I think the joke's on them, though. I think no human being is ever going to transfer their consciousness into a machine. I think that's the lie. I think it's all a lie. The promise, the carrot being dangled in front of the donkey, Yeah. You will be as gods. You will live forever. Just eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and you can build that vessel that you can put your consciousness into and live forever. You'll be like a god on earth. That's the first lie the serpent told Adam and Eve in the garden. The very first lie. I think it is a lie. I don't think you can transfer consciousness. I think God made you a living soul, and he breathed that soul into the body, which is your body, which was lovingly and fearfully made by God, and nothing else can house it because there's nothing else like you out there. You are a soul and body at the same time. They're not actually separate from one another. It's not like the New Ages think, where it's like our body is a prison for the soul, and we need to free the soul from the prison so it can be our true selves, because we're all just consciousness, and we're all one consciousness collectively or something. It's bullshit. You cannot have a consciousness without a body. They're one in the same thing. They are one system. They're inseparable. Okay, that's how God made it. Okay, you are an embodied soul. There's nothing else to it. You're not a soul in a body. That's not how it works. and the body's one thing and the soul's another. It doesn't. That's a lie again. So this belief that we can transfer our soul in just another vessel, like a sleeve, as they call them in Altered Carbon, that TV show. That's a myth. That's a fantasy. That doesn't actually exist. But I think these tech billionaires really believe that that's the case. They are in the Gnosticism lie, the New Age thought, the consciousness thought lie. They think that's true because they've rejected God, and he's the way it really works. They're going to try and do it without him. But the demons who have facilitated this, who have taught mankind the knowledge to do these things, you're building a body for them. That's the bait and switch. You're building their new bodies that they're desperate for so they can get back onto the earth and do what they used to do before the flood. So I think that's the ultimate long con at play here. Like, yes, mankind is building the very things that are going to enslave them, thinking it's for them, thinking they get to have it. No. Once you've mastered it and you have factories and warehouses just full of these blank robot bodies with brains capable of housing consciousness, it's not you who gets to transfer into them. They'll very quickly get filled with this parasite, this army of parasites that are just waiting to fill them. They're just waiting on the sidelines. And that's it. That's my long-term vision of how that's all going to play out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just some schizo crazy person just smashing a bunch of stuff together. But I think that's a well-reasoned, thought-out hypothesis. I think that's probably what they're really doing there,
This kind of gets us to probably the last thing to talk about and wrap up is this fork in the road that we seem to be getting to, where I view everything as either natural and natural law, nature, what is, versus everything that's artificial and technology that they're creating. And so what makes everything natural, alive, whether you want to call it consciousness, the spark of life, Christ consciousness, whatever, versus what are we building? As you say, we've built out this system from 5G towers and everything that's changing the frequency and all this energy and control. As you say, can AI inhabit these Nephilim, inhabit these robots and this technology to control us even further? Because that's who these people worship, all this evil stuff. So where do you think we're at with this fork in the road? Are we going to have like almost two societies of people that get sucked into living in this one way versus people that go back to living in touch with nature?
Well, I think man makes plans and God laughs. I think much of the agendas at play will never see the finality. I don't think they're ever going to make it as far as they want to go with these things. I mean, you're already seeing now a lot of companies who fired a lot of staff and replaced them with AI are reversing that decision now, because AI success rate is actually abysmal. They're only correct like 70 to 80% of the time. Now, that's actually really bad for a business to have that running your books. To have that doing your paperwork and your receipts and everything and all the stuff you used to have a person in an office doing. They have to be right 100% of the time, or the tax man's coming out to you, to see what's going on. Like, you're in trouble, So I think they believed a lot of the hype, swapped a lot of staff for AI, and the businesses have either gone under or suffered greatly, and they've had to rehire the staff that they fired. And I think that's just the rub of it all, really. That's the kind of the humor of it all. They have these grandiose ideas, but it's probably more of a con than it is practical in terms of actually using it in a practical basis beyond what the long-term actual goal is, to create like a biological synthetic brain situation that has the capacity to think like a neural network in the human brain. So they just need the capacity. What's going to fill it will be a real consciousness that can take control of the framework and then work with it, And even right now, there's some people say demons even use it right now to talk to people, like, and be the text that talks back to you in some way. And I don't know about that. If that's true. I don't know if that's the case or not. Like a modern day Ouija board situation, maybe. Who really knows? But I don't think it's going to be like civilization will split as much as we think it is. In fact, I think even right now, I think God's moving in amazing ways. And I think there's been like a Christian revival of a sort. And I think there's also been like a mass awakening, people have described it, of especially since COVID, of just how far gone our civilization actually is and how psychopathic some of our leaders truly are. And I think people are actually a lot more aware than they used to be. So I'm interested to see how it plays out. I don't have any predictions for you necessarily. If it's a little season, there isn't long left. I don't know how long, how long's a piece of string, but the end game's coming soon. And the end game of that is war, the Gog Magog war. And that's literally people making war with God himself at the end of time. So the camp of saints, they call it. So how that looks, I think they'll play the alien invasion card and say we're under attack by aliens from outer space. But realistically, it's just New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, not a mothership, but we'll all believe we're under attack and our world is about to come to an end. And we need to defend it. Because I think we may see in the next maybe 10 to 20 years, it'll seem like all the bad people have been defeated. Those evil liberals out there are no longer in control, and the good old-fashioned traditionalist Christian conservative right has got more of a control once more, and the taxes are lower than ever, technology is more advanced than ever, everyone gets a house now, and everything's perfect. I reckon we're going to start getting more of that kind of world coming into fruition, like a huge pendulum swing away from the 1984 style Brave New World hybridized drugs and I don't know what do you call it, like full control mechanisms going the other way, back to freedom again. And it's going to seem like we have a victory. I think this is Satan's plan to give us a golden age, like the millennial reign, but it won't last for 1,000 years. I think it's going to get cut very short, and everyone's going to have something to fight for. They're going to want to cling on to this wonderful world that they've been hoping for so long, living under such misery out of the 20th century, to the 21st century. It's kind of, mankind has made it to a state of perfection. That's wonderful. And now aliens have turned up and they want to take it all away from us. Well, that's actually Jesus Christ returning for the final Gog-Magog war. And everyone's been convinced to go make war with him to defend what they've just gained, But the truth is, the kingdom of heaven far surpasses anything that can be made on this earth by Satan. But we are going to be in a state where we have like a new world religion for this new world order where we are all God. We are all collectively consciousness God together, and we control our own evolution collectively, through our own decisions. There is no outside God beyond our own consciousness, that type of stuff, which all coincides and tracks with everything we've been researching and talking about today. So I think we're going to see something wonderful. It's going to seem perfect, but it's not. It's going to be the final lie in preparation for that end time war. Where everyone's going to be convinced to make war with God, basically. And that's going to look weird. It's not going to look like anything we can describe. It's not going to look at any movie you can watch. It's going to be psychedelic, man. It's going to be crazy. The heavens are going to open up like a scroll. It's going to be like maybe everyone gets the vision back all at once and we see the spirit realm. It's going to be something crazy happen, beyond comprehension, I imagine, how it's all going to culminate. But this is all just speculation. Who really knows? Well, there's many agendas at play, many agendas.
Well, it has been crazy times already. If people don't think the world's already getting crazy, we've now got volcanoes erupting for the first time in thousands of years and all that stuff we saw last week. So I think we are in for wild times ahead. But if you know all this stuff, I think it's almost enjoyable. You can sit back and watch and just do your own thing, really. But thought-provoking chat.
What else is to do, yeah.
I'm sure people have loved that. I'll put all the links to follow your work down below. But any final thoughts for people at home?
No, look, no fear with any of this stuff. I know some of the things I say might sound a bit like, what do we do? What are we supposed to do in the space of all that? Well, truly, just get right with God and no fear at the end of the day. Our kingdom is not of this world. His kingdom is not of this world. And as long as you believe in Jesus Christ, that he died and rose again for your sins, then when it comes to that final judgment I talked about after that war, he'll only see his spotless and blameless son and not the wretched sinner you actually know you are, and you'll get access to the kingdom and the new heaven and earth at the end of all of this. And that it truly is the Christian hope. And you don't have to know, but you can know. I think the little season research will really help you understand that this is real. This is actually what the long-term plan is. And all the things I've said, the conspiracies I've talked about, they're real. You can go find them. That's really happening. And I think you can gain some real peace of mind if you get to know Jesus Christ and the Father in heaven. I think he can really help you get through that. That's all I can say. I can't end it on anything else.
Fantastic, mate. Well, I've really enjoyed that. We'll have to catch up again in future. And keep up all the great work. Cheers.
Thanks for having me, Alex. It's been great.
Thanks, guys.